Hey, what's up, everyone? So I just finished up this character head and did all the sculpting, did the retopology, UV maps, and painted all the textures. And it came to my attention that in 3D-Coat, a lot of people don't really know how the workflow works for sculpting a character and going through all those steps. So I thought I'd make a video to show not how to do every little thing that I did on this character, that would take a long time, but I would show just the basic steps of where you start off a little bit in the sculpting, and then we do some retopology and set up some simple UV maps, and then send it over to the paint room to do a little bit of painting. So if that's what you're interested in, stay tuned and we'll get started. So here we are on the main screen. Now if you're going to start sculpting, you have two choices. You have voxel sculpting or surface sculpting. This is working on voxels or volumetric pixels, and this is basically working on a polygonal mesh. So I normally like to start with voxel sculpting, and you can switch back and forth between them as you work if you like. So we'll start with voxels, and I'm going to pick the large sphere to start with. And here we've got a red shader on it, and you can pick whichever one you like. Okay, once you click one, you may get this pop up. You can just click OK on it. And that one's good. Here we go again. That one's good, but I like this one a little bit better, which you can't really see any difference now, but once you start sculpting on it, you'll see it looks a little weird with this one, for a character anyway. So I'm going to turn on my grid. Now, I've got my panels here set up the way I like them, but they may be a little bit different for you. But if there's anything in here that you don't see, you will be able to find it up here under Windows and pop-ups, and all of the possible panels are listed in here. So you can just click one and then just drag it in. And let's see, we have the space bar will give you a quick pop-up selection box for all of your tools that are available on the left here. So what I like to do with my models is, let's see, I'm going to turn this to an orthographic view with the little box up here. And then I'm going to set it to look at it from the side view. I'm using the 6 key on my numeric pad. And I'm going to press S for symmetry. And we have symmetry enabled and on the X-axis. And we have a plane there that shows us where it is, but I'm going to hide that so we can see what we're doing. And press spacebar, and I'm going to use move. And let's see, pick a brush alpha. I'm going to pick the solid circle one. And I'm going to right click and drag to make that fairly large, not quite as big. And just get as close as I can to the edge there, and then just pull it down. It's not exactly perfect. But then, okay, let's turn the orthographic off. And I'm just going to freestyle it now. I'm not going crazy with this model, just to quickly show you the workflow. Let's turn that grid off. And just pull this out a little bit. Let's undo that. I'm going to switch it to this softer brush. Okay, pull that out. And then we can kind of roughly pull out the chin and the top of the head. Alright, I'm going to go back to orthographic and hit the 6 key again. And let's pull the chin out a little bit and pull up the top of the head some. This is, just a rough shape. This is how I basically get started with the shape of the head. And pull this up a little bit. Pull that up. And then we can switch over to the smooth brush. I'll use a soft alpha. And just kind of smooth it out a little. Yeah, so you get the general idea. I'm not going to sculpt an entire head. Just showing you how I get basically started. Let's pick the build here. Build up. That's a little too much. Build up the chin a little bit. Fill in this put a little something where the nose will go. And hold Control to go in. So here we get some eye sockets. Yeah. I got a basic human head here. It looks kind of like something a kindergartner made with Play-Doh. Build out some of the torso, shoulders a little bit. And I'm going to hold Shift and smooth that out a little bit more. Doesn't work quite as strong as the actual smooth tool. Switch over to that. That's really strong. Okay, some kind of weird alien creature now. Let's go back to move. Pull this in a little bit. Use the transform tool. Let's click OK on that. And I'm just going to grab this little box here on the side to shrink everything in a little bit, make it a little bit less round. Okay, so you get the general idea of how sculpting works there. And we can see it is in voxel mode. If I press the W key, you can see the wireframe. It's actually a pretty dense wireframe for this. But if I click on that V, we can switch over to that surface mode, like I said. And now we get a whole different set of tools there. So suppose I can see that this is too dense. So I can pick clean clay there, and it's set to reduce. I got a nice big brush, and I can just draw all over it and reduce it in areas where I don't need a lot of detail. Which for this model is pretty much everywhere. But yeah, so that's how that works. And then if I want to add some more detail, what I normally do is pick the live clay tool, and if I want to draw with this, it will add more detail wherever I'm drawing, so where I need it. But if I just want to add some detail and not draw specifically with that tool, I'll just drag up and down with the right mouse button and drag it all the way down so it's 0 depth, and then I can just add detail. And with this, the size of the brush matters. So the larger the brush, the less detail it will add. Oops. Also, if I do want more detail with a larger brush, I can come over here to the tool options and I can just crank up the detail. So that's that amount. But if I crank it higher, we can go even more. And of course, again, with a smaller brush, I can get a lot of detail there. So that's actually making the system struggle. It's so much right there. But Yeah, so if you're gonna do tiny things like pores or like little wrinkles on the lips or under the eyes, that's where you're gonna need that kind of detail. But for the rest of it, you really don't. And suppose you have a ton of detail. So let's pick, I don't know, like a draw tool. And I'm going to pick, say, a little brush like that. And so I'm going to hold Control and click in there gently. And so let's say this is how we're making our pores on our character. And we've done this all over the entire body. And you say, oh no, I need to make a larger change to that area. So we can come down here to our, well, I added this decimation slider, which you can get from that Windows drop down there. Or you can just click this little arrow pointing down to a hard drive, and it will reduce, it takes a few seconds, but it'll reduce the model down lower. And you can choose under geometry and proxy method, you can choose how much it's going to decimate it or reduce it. But anyway, it reduces it, and then you can, you know, make larger changes without damaging the detail you had before. So I'm going to go even further. I'll just drag this decimation slider down. And the bigger change you make, the longer it'll take. But as you can see now, we got almost no detail in here. But I can make more of a wide change. Fill that in. And smooth it out. And then we'll come back over here and press where the little hard drive and arrow used to be. Now there's this kind of a return arrow. So we'll press that and it'll go back. And now I've got the larger change we made while still retaining that fine little pore detail. Alright, so that's very basic little look at the sculpting room. So next, let's move on and do some retopology. So through the magic of YouTube, we're all finished with our sculpting. We've got our fine details like those pores, the lip wrinkles in there, and the wrinkles under her eyes and mouth, forehead. Got all our detail up here. And if I press W for wireframe, you can see I did not bother with as much detail on the back of the head because that will be covered with hair. So that saves a little system resources. And of course the bottom down here also not as much detail. Before I move on, I just wanted to talk about reference. When you're sculpting, you always have to be looking at reference. And this is not a promoted video or anything, but I just really wanted to talk about this and recommend this program called PureRef. It's a free program to download. I'll put a link in the video description. And this is just really great. You can just drag and drop all of your reference images in here. And then you can zoom in and out with the mouse wheel. You can move the whole window around with the right mouse button. And there's also a menu in here with a lot of different options. Of course, you can resize it. And you can use the middle mouse button to pan the different the canvas around in there. You can move our images around, of course. There are options in there to automatically rearrange everything. Images, arrange, optimal. Oh, okay, that didn't work. But yeah, it's a really handy program. and I used it for working on this sculpture. So I didn't necessarily exactly copy any one of these things, but if I want to look at the way a nose looks, I can really have that zoomed in and just keep it off to the side while I'm working. And yes, it will stay always on top while you're working. And then as I moved on to go past 3D-Coat, I used it as hair reference. But yeah, that's just a quick mention of this PureRef app. It's really handy, and always look at reference while you're sculpting. But so yeah, let's move on to the Retopo room. It's this tab up here. And I'm just going to grab this UV preview window and drag it up here. Okay, so that is up there. And we can start with our retopology. Again, we can hit spacebar and we have the same tools that are available over here. And what I normally like to start with is the strokes tool. And I'll take that and I can just start drawing strokes. Say under her eye. And again, I'm not going to go into crazy amounts of detail with this, but I'll just do a little bit. Just draw these out. And let's draw another one to finish this off. There we go. I can straighten that out a little bit. And we'll just press enter. And I can see that we ended up with an N-gon by accident in here, so let's hit spacebar and do the add split tool. And I can just click that dot and then click a dot on this edge. And now we've got our nice quad. And I'll hit escape to finish the tool. Yeah, we can do a few more strokes. I'm going to start down here and finish on the previous mesh. Let's make sure this is totally crossing it. Press enter again. Okay, now switch to another tool. This is the points and faces tool I use quite a bit. So I can just click and make dots. And then as you can see, it's trying to show me where it can fill in a polygon in there. So once I can see the preview where I want it, and I can just right click and create a polygon. So it's real quick to just go through and fill those in. So let's do a few more of those. Okay. Another one that comes in really handy for me is the quads tool. Now, if one of those other tools just a weird angle or something and it doesn't really want to work, this is really handy to just click one of the edges on there and then click, and you can just add very precisely where you want these things to be. Okay, and then finish it off there. And finish that off. And then let's just finish that off with some more points and faces. Click, 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 click. And I can right click to drag these points if I want to adjust them. Click, 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 click. And just fill those in. And so it works, but it's a little bit messy. So I'll hit spacebar and I'm going to pick the brush tool And we'll just expand it, just right-clicking, dragging. And I can just adjust them manually, like so. Or, I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. I can hold Shift and just drag over them, and it'll smooth out the polygons. And this really works well. I do this pretty much every time I finish placing some polygons. I go over it with this brush tool and just smooth them out. Makes them really nice and clean and even. So once you're done placing everything all over the model and completely retopologizing it, you're going to have to set up some UV maps. So down here on the still in the retopo room, you can find mark seams, and we'll click that, and we have a whole bunch of different options for that. The standard mark seams will just let you click along the edges there, and now you have two separate islands in the UV map. Or you can hold Shift and it'll do the entire edge loop. So now we have three separate islands. For really large, complicated ones, what I really like is this UV path. Bring that back up. And what that one will do is I can click one point and then drag somewhere else, and it'll give you a little pink preview there showing you where the edge is going to be. And then when you're done, just press enter, and it'll draw the edge or the seam right where you left it. So that really comes in handy when you're on a really complex model and you need your seam to go all the way around. So let's undo some of these seams for a second. And if I need, let's go back to the UV path. So I can click on one of those points there and drag it down to here, and then drag it somewhere over here, and then just keep on sort of loosely telling it where I want it to go, and then just go somewhere else. And now I want it to go over here, and now I want it to be on this corner. So I'll press enter, and now I've got a very strangely shaped island there. But then I can, let's hit escape to drop the tool. You can see up the top here is pick point 1 and now pick point 2. And then it'll tell you either continue dragging or press enter to finish marking the seam. So now we've got 3 islands here. Let's escape again, point 1, drag it, and point 2. Press enter. Alright, so we've got kind of a jigsaw puzzle of a UV map here. But we don't actually have the map set yet. Let's bring this UV preview down and stretch it out a little bit. And we still have to come down here and actually unwrap it. So we have the unwrap button down here. And there we go. And there's a few different tools in here to rearrange those. So if I come back to mark seams, then we have a few different tools here to rearrange those, such as pack UV. It'll rearrange them to make them fit better in the UV map. We have pack UV 2, which is just a different configuration. And a few others here. Auto scale to make sure they're as big as they can be to take up the most resolution in your image. And that's pretty much it. So while we're on mark seams, make sure I'm still on that. Yep. We have a few options up here where we can make some edits to our UV map. So I can select and move vertices. Select that. I can move it around. Just put a little gizmo. And you can see when they're not right, they turn either red or blue. And sometimes you'll see they'll be red or blue just when you're making the map. Now, just after you unwrap it. And it may look great, but you've got some of these red and blue areas where it's not quite, it's a little bit distorted, not quite perfect. We can also click and move on faces. Move that around, rotate a little bit. Oh, that's not right. But then if you come over here to the brush tool, just like before, I can make that a little bit bigger. I can grab these and move them around. Oh, I've got that selected. You can grab those and move them around. And let's come over here back to faces, and I can control click to deselect that. I'll come back to the brush, and like I was saying, you can move these around, or you can hold shift and smooth them out so they go correctly. Now they won't smooth the very edges, but anything that's inside, and that's a good thing. But yeah, we'll get that right in there and smooth it. And so you just, ideally you want to have it as close to this kind of gray color as you possibly can. In some cases it's just not possible to go totally gray, but you want to go as close as you can. So that's it with our retopo and UV editing. Now you're ready to bake it and go off onto the paint room where you can start painting your textures. So like magic again, the UV map is all finished and the seams are marked and unwrapped. Take a look around and show you what I've done. Okay, and again, like I said, here's the UV map, and yeah, some of the areas are a little bit blue and red. It's pretty much unavoidable with a full head like this. So I did brush it, smooth it out, and get it as good as I can. That looks pretty good. And now we're ready to go off to the paint room. So first of all, I have a couple of voxel eyes in here, eyeballs, that I don't want in there while I'm baking. So let's go. I have the Vox tree set up here, and I have my eyes layer that I will just hide. And then I'll come up here to the bake menu, and the one I want is already highlighted for me because I guess that's the most common one. So it's bake with normal map, per pixel mode. So pop that up. And here we go. And so here we have an inner and outer shell that'll make sure that the normal maps get baked properly. So right now show outer shell is selected, and up here we have scan depth inside and outside. So we want to drag left and right on the outside. And as I go, you can see if I drag left, it'll go more in, and if I'm going right, it'll go more out. So I want to drag it all the way to the right until the sculpted mesh disappears, and just until it disappears. So you can see there's a little bit left, so just until it's gone. And then I'm going to look all around and make sure that all of it is gone. So there's a little bit here and a little bit on the shoulders. So I'll drag it a little bit further till, yep, it's just about all gone there. Yep, so I do not see any of the original mesh poking through now. So now I can switch to preview inner shell. And so now we see it poking, we see the retopo mesh poking out. And so I'm going to adjust the inside depth. And if I drag that to the right, it disappears. To the left, we see more of it. So again, I want to drag to the right until I don't see any more of that color or the wires. So I see a little bit still in this collarbone area. Drag a little bit more and it's gone. Once again, I'm going to check all around, make sure that I don't see any more. And I think that does it. Yep. So that looks good. And so I'll click OK. And it'll take a second. Okay, so now we have our import options. And right now, let's see, I'm going to set this to, I'm going to set my subdivision to around 128, we'll say, because I know when I get to Lightwave 3D later, I'm going to divide it by 3. So this is no subdivision, then 1, 2, and 3. And we have keep UV. And smoothing for Lightwave, I am going to set it to keep the sharp corners. So I'll set it to smooth but keep corners. And I will turn on auto smoothing groups. And I set my max angle usually in the upper 60s, like around 67, 68, something like that. And down here I have my UV set, so I can give that a name, call it head, click OK. And for the texture size, this is pretty detailed, so I want a good texture size. I'm going to set it to 4096, and when you do the top one, it automatically fills in the bottom one for you too. So that's it for this part. So we'll click OK, and we'll take a moment, and it'll bake it out to the texture, to the painting room. And so when we're done, it'll ask if I want to fill the empty parts of the texture. I will say yes. And just take a second longer. Okay, let's click OK on this. And now it's done. We can move over to the paint room. And so right now we have our newly baked mesh as well as the voxel mesh. So I'm going to come over. I have my vox tree in here for the voxels, and I'm going to hide the head layer. And so now here we are. This is our low res mesh or medium res mesh. So if I hit W, I get our polygon mesh, and this is subdivided, so we get a lot more polygons than you would when you export. But there you go, it's ready to be painted on. And if we come up here to textures and down to texture UV editor, we get a little pop-up that shows our textures that have been baked. So this is the color. Here's the normals. And the roughness, which nothing is on there yet, so it'll just be gray. And you can turn on a wireframe for it. So that's the low-res wireframe. And you can double-click it again if you want the high-res wireframe. And you can actually paint on this too, just like in Photoshop. So if you want to paint on this, come over here to layers, and this really is a lot like working in Photoshop. We've got all of our layers down here. I seem to have some extra layers from what I was working on earlier, but I'll just make a new layer and call this, say, call it lips. Okay, and on our toolbar here, I have my colors, and let's cancel that. I'm going to switch to the other color. Just like Photoshop, it's like clicking in one of the corners will switch them, or pressing X. And I have all my brushes up here, the brush alphas. And let's zoom in on these lips. And up here we have the normal map, the color, and the specular. So if I want to paint all three of those, I can actually paint on there with painting on the normal map, so it adds some real depth, and holding control will go in, but it will also paint the color, the depth, and the specular in there as well. So obviously I don't want to paint it like that. Let's undo. So I'm going to turn off the depth, the normal map, and I'm going to paint with just the color and the specular. So I'm just brushing gently on there, not pressing too hard. And I'm pressing a little bit harder now. And you can do the same up here, and you can move the lighting around and adjust that if you want to make it a little easier to see. So, and then again, of course, you can adjust the opacity, you can adjust the depth if you're using that, and the metalness and the roughness. So if I want to make that more rough, I can do that. So it's a little less shiny now. I'll bring that roughness back down to 0. And we can see it's definitely a lot shinier. And you can have all three of those on the same layer. So get rid of that. And I'm going to use that same color. I can paint some of the inside of the nose and the inside of the eye sockets in here. I'm not really being super neat and tidy with this. You get the idea. So up here we have this panel, which does have a name, but I'm not sure exactly what it is. Most people just call it the E panel because you can always open it by hitting the E key. So you have a whole bunch of different brushing options up here. I won't go through them all, but here these basically control your pen pressure. So if I click this one, it's constant pressure, where I don't have to press at all and I get the same exact thing every time. And see, this one is droplet pressure, so it's increasing. Yeah, I never really used that one, so I'm not sure what it's good for. But then we have this one, is radius, depth, and opacity pressure. So if I turn the depth back on, we can adjust it with our pen. Okay, bring it back. What I use most often is either just the full pressure or this one that is depth and opacity. So the brush stays the same size, and you can just gently go over it, and it's great for just filling in some areas. Or if I wanted to fill in these eyes, for example, let's turn off the depth, and I can just gently brush over those to fill them in, or press a little bit harder. And yeah, so it's basically just like Photoshop if you're used to Photoshop, and most of the same tools you'll find over here are similar to Photoshop. And when you're all done painting, you can come over to the render room, click that, and I have real-time render turned on. So it looks real nice. I have a couple of lights already set up over here. So, I mean, you're not going to do any kind of major, full final render with this, but it's good if you just want to show it to a client or a friend or something, or post it online. Let's go back to the paint room. And so when you're all done painting, you want to export, you can come up to File, and then it's already highlighted, Export Objects and Texture. And here we can set the file name. And I'm going to tell it to export textures. And then you can tell it which textures you want to export. So like color, roughness, ambient occlusion if you have it baked. And that's it. And then you just click OK. And it'll save out your model. And there you have it. That's a look at our full workflow for sculpting, retopo, and UV mapping and painting in 3D-Coat. So here's a look at my final model here. You can take a look at her if you like. Yep, pretty nice if you ask me. I think she came out pretty well. So there we go. So if you liked this video and you learned something, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, all that stuff, subscribe if you want to see more of these kind of videos, and I'll see you next time.